Afternoon, everybody. I was so nervous to do this, and then someone mentioned thermal underwear before they started doing their talk. So thank you to that person. I feel a little bit more at ease. And now I've said thermal underwear, so let's do this. Okay. Monitoring biodiversity trajectories within the restoration process in the Thicket biome. Next slide. Okay. So this presentation is coming from a Spekboom restoration perspective, and we're going to talk a little bit about how there's a limitation in the long-term data that we have on biodiversity throughout the restoration process, how we can potentially tackle that problem, and then a few things that we monitor in our own projects at Nat Carbon and Imperative. Cool. So one of the looming problems that we have is this gap in the long-term data on how restoration projects actually impact biodiversity within the thicket system. And it's really interesting because these restoration projects are gaining a lot of momentum. There's a lot of investments going into these types of projects, but it's not really a prerequisite to monitor biodiversity. So that gap is only going to remain unless we do something about it. So how can we do something about that? That's something I'm going to talk about today. If we could measure everything, that would be super, super cool. Things like soil organisms, insects, bats, birds, frogs, toads, mammals, reptiles, all of it. But within the kind of limitations of being a project, you have to think about what is feasible, what is affordable, and what is repeatable, otherwise known as FAR. That's what I'm going to call it, FAR. And effective. Effective is also really important, but then it would be fear. So, and I'm already really scared, so we're not going to talk about fear, but just keep that in the back of your mind. So, encapsulating what you can do as a project where you have to think about employees, budget, time, and applying that to the dimensions of biodiversity is really important because you want to monitor this properly, you want to honor the monitoring system so you can capture biodiversity properly, so we can see how these restoration projects impact biodiversity. So some of the things that we monitor in our project are vegetation, mammals and reptiles, and then birds and bats and anurans, which is pretty cool. And then another thing you need to think about as a restoration project is what is the target, like what is the end goal? Can you say that if we just monitor our own restoration site for 40 plus years, and every year or every 5 years we continuously resurvey, remonitor, is that enough to see how well our restoration process is going? Where's the end goal? When do you say, like, yay, we've done it? And that's where something like a reference site becomes quite valuable. This is just from Google, what's it called? Earth, Google Earth. That place. I didn't reference it, but this is from Google Earth. And you can see here we have these pockets or these islands of intact, healthy thicket systems in and amongst like vast degradation. And restoration will take place in those degraded spaces. And then we don't really utilize those healthy systems enough. So having something like a reference site where you can apply the same monitoring techniques and look for the same things in your degraded sites can be applied here. And then you get an idea of what can we expect, what should we work towards. And having your reference site close to your restoration site is also really important because it makes it a fair comparison. It would be kind of strange to have all the work happening in Klipplaat, but then your reference site is in Addo Elephant Park. That doesn't really make sense. So something like a reference site allows us to have an end goal. And it's also super enticing to say that restoration will increase biodiversity when we don't actually know. We might have the same number of species, but a completely different type of faunal communities, or maybe even less animals. I don't know. That's what we got to figure out. Okay, I'm just going to take a breath. Okay, we're doing this, okay. Vegetation, like I mentioned, is one of the things that we monitor in our project. And we're looking specifically at species diversity and abundance. The goal of these projects is essentially to change the structure of a system. We're moving from a degraded open system back to an intact closed system. And something that gives structure to a system is the vegetation. So we're directly impacting those plant communities. And we want to see, does actively planting Spekboom have an impact on other plant species? Like, will it facilitate the recruitment of other plant species? We don't know. And that's where having a reference site will help us understand what should we be looking for and how can we get there. And if we're not getting there, what else do we need to do? And then documenting rare, threatened, and endangered species, always a good idea to just protect those things that need protecting, understanding where they are, how we can facilitate, obviously looking after them. What else did I have to say? Oh, this is also a FAR. This is affordable, feasible, repeatable. Cool. And then the other aspect of our biodiversity monitoring is the small to medium mammals and reptiles. The restoration process is super slow. Over decades, we'll likely see a change from micro-level changes to a full landscape level change. And with those changes, we'll see change in niche availability, foraging availability, and habitat structure changes. So we can expect there would be a change in the faunal communities. I mean, something like increased shade could have a huge impact on what type of reptiles we see. So it would be quite a useful indicator to start monitoring the types of animals we see in our degraded sites, as well as those reference sites, so we can watch that shift. And camera traps are an excellent option when it comes to monitoring faunal species. It's affordable, it's feasible, I'm saying affer now. It's feasible, affordable, and repeatable. And there's a lot of information on how you can effectively use camera traps and process the images, which is also useful. And then this is my baby, so I'm comfortable speaking about this. Just like the mammals and reptiles, we can expect to see a change in avian and bat species. Birds and bats are very sensitive to habitat change, and they're also mobile. They fly. Don't know if you know that. They fly. So this is the third component of our monitoring. I'm so sorry, guys. This is the third component of our biodiversity monitoring. And we use something. We don't use something. We use bioacoustics to monitor these types of animals. So we can expect a change in these faunal communities because we're changing their habitat as well, going from open and degraded to closed and intact. And acoustic monitoring of birds means that you can also monitor anurans, which are your frogs and your toads. So if you can, why not do that? And bioacoustics is an excellent tool to gather a huge amount of data over long periods of time, and it gives you a really great insight into what's out there, what's missing. And just from my own experience from recording at our restoration sites versus our reference sites, it sounds completely different, which I'll play now. And the field of bioacoustics is growing tremendously. Recently, I went on a course with another colleague of mine just to learn a little bit more about it. And we have the African bioacoustics community that's slowly growing and gaining momentum. You can sign up to the newsletter. They're really cool. So you can get help from them as well. I'm really sorry if I hurt your ears, but I'm going to just play some sounds. So I also hope it plays, because that would be awkward if it didn't. So this first recording is from our restoration site. So picture not much out there, birds there, but it's windy, there's a few trees, yeah. That's a rufous-eared warbler and a karoo korhan in the background, and a sabota lark. Cool, so that is from our restoration site. So it's like 3 species that you can hear there. And then this next clip is from a reference site nearby. That is a ringneck dove, a southern lubu, there's some bulbuls in the background, and a bar-throated apallus. Sorry, do you want me to play that again? You fine. Okay, cool. So as you can hear, they are like, that's about 4 species in that recording, but they sound completely different. And birds like the bar-throated apallus, you'll get, I hear them in our restoration sites, but they're also there. So that kind of shift in communities is what's really interesting and what we should be documenting. And yeah, it would be really cool to listen on the restoration process as well, not just baseline restoration site, reference site. Oh gosh, it's happening again. Okay, sorry. I knew that would happen. Okay. So just to finish off, we are missing that long-term data to understand how these restoration projects impact biodiversity, but it's something that we could all contribute to closing that gap. We can't really say that there is a direct increase in biodiversity once we start these restoration projects. We need to chase understanding the quality of the species transitions, and yes, the numbers are important, but we might see the same number of species as we restore a place, but they could be just completely different species, and that's important. We want to put the right things back, not chase some number. And that's why reference sites are so important, to understand exactly what we're looking at and why we're doing this. And using the FAR approach so that we can have long-term data in these projects. Thank you.